Now, folks, I've given this a lot of thought because frankly, I don't want to make this seem like it's a personal grievance, okay? I think we have to start doing more videos about TYT, largely because th- they're just increasingly conservative in a way that I find disturbing to see, and in a way that I believe requires pushback. Okay? So, one of the things I saw today, which is frankly,
Polling shows that American
oh, spoilers. One of the things I saw today, which frankly drove me crazy, was from actually from 2 days ago. But you know what? I I'm a bit disgusted, frankly. You've got Dave Rubin here, having seen Anna Kasparian go on Piers Morgan, say, "Hey, Anna Kasparian, glad to see you're rethinking some things. For the record, I can explain my classically liberal beliefs quite well. I wrote 2 books about them, and I never lied about TYT. Some people lied to you. That's not what's important. Want to break the internet?" Like the grift is almost complete, chat. The grift is almost complete. And I don't think it's unfair to talk about their positions now. Okay? And I'm not going to make this like a oh the drama whatever. We've already done that. You know, what I care about is like their reporting now on a purely professional level, right? You know, we did that long series of videos about how they were spreading misinformation about like Venezuelan gangs in Colorado, and essentially they fabricated that story and like never issued any corrections. Or at the very least they uncritically re-reported that story and never issued any corrections. I shouldn't say they fabricated it. That was a misspeak. And I know that cuz I covered it. Like I was paying attention to that story and nothing they said about it was correct. And then Jose came and made that even bigger video about it, and Jose did a much better job than I did. But you know what? I was there first. And all that to say, there's another video that I want to go over that I'm just irritated about on a deep level, and I think that this actually segues into the next segment that I have planned. So we're gonna go over this. We're gonna go over this. All right. So this is a video from 5 days ago, right? And it's titled, "Are Trans Activists Reevaluating Their Strategy?" And there are so many problems with this video, with the people that information is being drawn from, and I just need to really start pointing it out. Because it's kind of too egregious for me to just kind of be like, well, you know, they're just one of the biggest news networks online. You know, I'm nothing compared to their channel. I'm a nobody, right? But I feel like a kind of professional obligation to push back on this. So, without further ado, here we go.
polling shows that Americans actually seem to be growing less empathetic to the transgender cause. But what's behind it? What's going on here? Well, some activists and movement leaders think that it is due to the transgender movement's confrontational and accusatory approach. And I'm not saying that. This lengthy piece published in the New York Times this week really did delve into it.
Now, before we go on here, you're not saying that, but you are making the choice to highlight this as a story. Right? So, in a way, you are saying that, though. Like, you're highlighting this story because you largely agree with it. Like, playing this off as like, oh, well, it's not me saying it, it's the trans activists. Right?
This lengthy piece published in the New York Times this week really did delve into it. So,
Now, I also wanted to go back a little bit here. Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, right here.
growing less empathetic to the transgender cause. But what's behind it?
What's behind it? What an excellent question. Now, I just want to point out something here, which is that there's a really let's take a look at polling. Let's take a look at the polling really quick. Okay? And by the polling, I mean specifically, let's take a look at Pew Research Center and where people were on transgender Americans back in 2022. That's 2 years ago. Where were they at? Oh, most favor protecting trans people from discrimination, even as growing shares say gender is determined by sex at birth. 64% of people were in favor, said they were strongly in favor or favored laws or policies that would protect transgender people from discrimination in jobs, housing, and public spaces. That's a pretty big number. Now, I'm just going to grant that support for trans rights has gone down over the last 2 years. Can anyone think of anything that may have caused the downswing in support for trans rights? Just using your common knowledge and critical thinking skills. Anybody? Bueller? Trump. Oh, Punky Gal. You brilliant chatter, you. Yeah. It's almost like someone came through and dropped almost $250 million on anti-trans ads. And you might say, like, well, it's I'm sorry, that generally intense media scrutiny of trans issues tends to cause a lot of fear and uncertainty around what the actual data says and around how conservatives feel they should treat or accept trans people. And that in turn leads to a lower rate of acceptance for trans people. It's not really that hard to figure out. Elon Musk dropped $250 million on top of that amount of money on like anti-trans ads and political organizing for Trump. Like, so much money went into fear-mongering about trans people. It's whoa, why did this happen? Was it your local protest group that has trans flags showing up at the Capitol building and like shaking signs? Or was it, almost $500 million being spent fear-mongering on the internet and at sporting events and on television and on the radio? I'm guessing it's the $500 million. Okay? So let's move on. But I wanted to kind of establish that up front because I feel like we're going to be coming back to these points.
Social media in particular, some of you might have seen time and time again, like advocates for the cause being pretty aggressive. And look, it comes from a good place. This is just about the tactics, right? They're
Again, you may have seen a lot of people being aggressive on social media, advocates for the cause. Not all of us trans people don't know each other. We aren't organized into a coherent, cohesive block. We're just mad. We're just mad people who are having our rights threatened or outright taken away. This isn't like us getting together and being like, "Okay, guys, we need a solid strat on this one. Let's go bully people who are transphobic." It's like, no. It's just that people in the trans community don't like transphobes. So we're going to be rude to transphobes or people peddling in transphobic bullshit. It's not rocket science here.
aggressively going after anyone they see as.
Oh, sorry. And if you think that that's like, oh, well, that's keeping your entire movement back. It's like, well, you know that in any kind of social movement, there are going to be people who get mad at folks who treat them poorly. That's true in any kind of movement for progress anywhere. Sometimes people are uncouth. And that's okay. Because they're not the faces of the movement. They're just some girl in thigh-high socks on Twitter.
Like stepping out of line, saying anything that might be deemed insensitive toward the trans community. For example, after a Democratic congressman defended parents who expressed concern about transgender athletes competing against their young daughters, a local party official and ally compared him to a Nazi cooperator. Okay, and a group called Neighbors Against Hate organized a protest outside his office. But look, the example that was detailed.
Oh no, somebody called him a rude word. I'm sorry, like, that's not news. That's not a news story. Someone being rude to like a Democratic operative is not worthy of note, really. I don't have an op-ed written about me every time someone says something bigoted to me. This isn't news.
In this piece that really bothered me is the one I'm about to
Also, Lady Ringcloud, that's true. Calling someone a Nazi is only rude if they're not a Nazi. If they are doing Nazi shit, that's just accurate.
Detail, okay? So last week, as we all know, Nancy Mace, and she's continued it like this week, like she's engaging in this really disgusting harassment campaign against an incoming transgender member of Congress, first openly transgender member of Congress to, serve in the House. And her name is Sarah McBride. And just preemptively off the right after the election where Trump proved to be successful, partly because of airing an ad about Democrats' support for transgender people, you have Nancy Mace try to capitalize on that, try to kind of piggyback off of that. And that's why I believe she's been attacking Sarah McBride pretty aggressively. But you would think the transgender community, or at least the activists, would support Sarah McBride and want to protect her. But
trans people and activists do want to protect Sarah McBride. No one's out there, or maybe someone is, but the vast majority of trans people, activists, posters even, want her to be safe. They want her to be able to use the bathroom that aligns with her gender identity. They want her to triumph over these bathroom bans because they know that if she doesn't, they're also going to get banned from the bathrooms. And so, what a lot of trans folks and activists really wanted was to see Sarah McBride take a defiant stance and overcome. You know, whether that is staging a bathroom sit-in, which, by the way, just happened recently at the Capitol building, and getting arrested over it. That sends a powerful message. It does. And instead, she said she would comply with the laws of the body, which seemed to really kind of align with saying, well, I will acquiesce to you treating me as a gender I am not. You know? And that's deeply dispiriting for the people in the trans community to see. Because it sets the tone. She's the most powerful elected trans official. And so it's dispiriting to see her, someone who has made history for like our particular group of people, accept treatment as if she is lesser. That's a blow. And I understand people being upset by that. Am I saying you should like it's good to harass her? Absolutely not. You should not harass her. You know, not everyone finds that it is particularly easy to rise to a difficult occasion with radical action. You know, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, right? So it's disappointing, but that's not a call to be like angry at her. But I understand people being angry, if that makes sense. It's because like we're angry at the system around her, and yeah, it's a shitty situation all around.
That unfortunately has not been the case. In fact, they are saying that she is a voice for her constituents rather than a voice for the transgender movement. And then they accused her of capitulating to the right. She has done no such thing at all. Okay. The fact that now she's getting this kind of hate from activists really upsets me. But look, that kind of strategy.
But also, like, I'm sorry, but you can't say this about the trans movement is getting mad at her. Who? Like, who are you talking about? Are you talking about like the Center for Transgender Equality? Are they mad at Sarah McBride? Or are you talking about people on Twitter? Like, are you talking about random posters on Twitter? Are you talking about like actual activists in the community? Like, who are you talking about? Because there's been no cited example except for the nebulous trans activists and trans movement. Who? Trans activists have names. Trans activist groups have names. Name one. Unless you're just talking about people online, and you've been online forever on TYT. You guys know people just say shit. People say angry, bigoted, mean stuff all the time while pushing their political ideas. But it's not a news story when non-trans people do it. So I have to wonder, why is it a news story when trans people do it? It's not a big deal. These are just people. Angry people. They're not a group working in coordination if they're just posters on Twitter.
Also doesn't really seem to be working. It's actually been pretty counterproductive for the transgender community. More than 24 red states now limit access to transition medical treatment, and public opinion is actually trending in the opposite direction that the
What's fascinating to me about this framing is that it puts the onus on trans activist groups for the conservative legislation. Trans activists, through their advocacy, did not pass that legislation. That was Republicans. The Republicans did that. And you might argue like, oh, well, the trans activists didn't stop it. Yeah, because they lacked the political power to do that in those states. Republicans want to eliminate them from society. Like, I'm sorry, putting this down to like some trans posters on Twitter causing dozens of states to adopt anti-trans policies, when again, remember earlier in this video where we pointed towards hundreds of millions of dollars being dropped on anti-trans advertising? And that's not even counting like the ungodly, untold number of monies that are spent at like Daily Wire on anti-trans fear-mongering. That's not counting like the think tanks that are lobbying on anti-trans policies. It's not taught that like, who is doing this? Who is responsible for the legislation? It's conservatives. Who's responsible for the shift in opinion? It's conservatives. Trans activists don't have billionaires supporting them and creating entire media companies around them in order to propagate pro-trans narratives. Trans advocates just have themselves. The framing is so bad that I can only conclude it's intentional, which is why I wanted to talk about this.
These advocates were pushing for. Fewer Americans today than 2 years ago say they support allowing children to undergo gender transition treatment, according to the Public Religion Research Institute. I will say the Public Religion Research Institute very clearly would have a bias. So I would take their data with.
I should have prepped this part. I prepped a lot of other things for this segment, but the sorry, what was it called again?
Research Institute.
Public Religion. Let's take a look. Oh, they work with the Brookings Institute. That makes sense. Yeah.
As
They're
a
deeply
trans
conservative.
activist, I am the only trans voice in all the groups I am advocating for our rights within the greater Dayton, Ohio area. I have just me. WTF is she talking about?
Yeah, like, unironically, I think what she's talking about is people on Twitter. This is, I genuinely, I think that a lot of this downfall is like Twitter brain rot in like terminal stages. Yeah, they have a deep bias, but take them seriously.
Very clearly would have a bias. So I would take their data with some grain of salt. But nonetheless, you kind of see it when it comes to public opinion. So I remember in 2016, when Republicans were trying to make the bathroom issue a big deal, the majority of Americans weren't buying it. The majority of Americans are like, let's just stop harassing transgender people. It's the bathroom. Like, there's stalls. Everything's going to be okay. I do think it gets a little tricky, though, when it comes to other, gender segregated or sex segregated spaces like a women's locker room and all of that. I don't want to get into the details, but like when it comes to the bathroom, most Americans were on the side of allowing transgender people to use the bathroom that they identify with. That's kind of changing now. I'm actually seeing a lot of support toward Nancy Mace and a lot of backlash toward the trans community. A 2024 YouGov poll found that 36% of Americans say societal acceptance of transgender people has gone too far. And that's actually a 7 percentage point increase since 2018. And numbers like that have led to some people rethinking their strategy. So Rodrigo Heng, I don't want to mispronounce his name, but Rodrigo Heng Littinen, who's the executive director of Advocates for Transgender Equality, argues, quote,
now, it was at this point that I was like, wait a minute, what is this piece that Anna's reading from? You know, we haven't heard that much about the actual New York Times piece that she's citing throughout all of this, right? It's simply a piece in the New York Times. So, the question being, which piece is it? Now, one of the nice things about TYT, and I do appreciate this about them, is that they often cite their source in the description. So, of course, I followed up on that. I went and I looked at their source and... well, wouldn't you know what I found? Found this article from the New York Times. Transgender activists question the movement's confrontational approach. Diminishing public support, some activists say. All or nothing tactics are not working. We have to make it okay for someone to change their minds. Huh, interesting premise. Let's see. Oh, this is from Rodrigo Lettinen, Executive Director for Advocates for Transgender Equality. And then I stopped because I was like, Jeremy W. Peters. Where have I heard Jeremy W. Peters' name before? Where have I heard that? And then I remembered. I heard that name from this article a few months ago. Critics say Musk has revealed himself as a conservative. It's not so simple. Elon Musk has... this is from 2 years ago, not a few months ago, sorry. Elon Musk has tweeted about political topics regularly since taking over Twitter, often belittling some liberal causes, but what he stands for remains largely unclear, which is only something you can say if you are a moron or a deliberate fool. And I think Jeremy W. Peters is, in fact, one of those deliberate fools. Maybe also a moron, but that remains to be seen. So you can get a job at the New York Times writing nothing but lies? Oh, Gamergy, this guy got his bachelor's degree and then went and wrote as a journalist in the Virgin Islands for like a local Virgin Islands newspaper for like 3 years. Went to Detroit, worked there for like 2 years, and then immediately got hired by the New York Times. And apparently was writing as a contributor for the New York Times while he was still getting his degree. All of which to me indicates like it's not passing the sniff test. That seems hella weird. That seems really weird, and like some shit was going on. Yeah, maybe nepotism much? Yeah. Anyway, I also just wanted to bring up another thing, which is that Anna's about to bring up this guy, right? This guy who is actually the face of the article here. This Rodrigo Littinen, right? And one thing that's really important to know about him as executive director of Advocates for Transgender Equality is that the day after this article went up, Advocates for Transgender Equality had to release a statement because the New York Times article written by this Jeremy fellow quoted him out of context. So he had to release a follow-up statement because of the out-of-context quote that the author of that article does, that does him dirty here, okay? Yesterday, New York Times ran an article in which I was quoted as saying, "We have to make it okay for someone to change their minds, and we cannot vilify them for not being on our side. No one wants to join that team." Because my quotes were taken out of context, I'd like to clarify what I meant. Those statements were regarding how to persuade everyday, undecided people in public, not people who have already taken actions to oppose our equality. Extreme right politicians targeting the trans community is the reason we are having this conversation at all. So I want to ensure that no one misinterprets our message to the community. A4TE's approach has not changed. We will continue confronting the institutions making the rules, and we will be at Capitol Hill and in the courts fighting to change the rules to build power for trans people. Trans people doing the best they can to live with respect and dignity are not the enemy. We are angry because extremists would like to ban us from bathrooms and control the decisions we make with our doctors. Make no mistake about who the opposition is here. We're gearing up for the fight of our lives against the incoming administration, and we are not backing off. For nearly a decade, trans advocates have been holding the line against thousands of anti-trans state bills and vile rhetoric to prevent the erosion of hard-fought progress. Now, more than ever, we need to use every tool we have because we cannot afford to cede any ground to anti-equality forces, and we are prepared to confront this period of uncertainty and hardship with the work our community relies upon. We will fight. We will organize, we will testify, we will march. Trans people have faced political and legal oppression before, and we will look back at our history to guide us on how we move forward. We cannot, however, allow our fear to provoke us to lose our values, because our values will sustain us. We can only survive what is to come if we hold on to each other and our ability to be decent and kind and just, because we are fighting for a future in which trans people are no less than equal. So, again, he was quoted as saying, "We cannot vilify them for not being on our side. No one wants to join that team. And we have to make it okay for someone to change their minds," without the very critical context that he was talking about undecided people, undecided or ignorant people, right? Who are not actively trying to harm us. So I feel like that's a really important thing to know about this article. And I want to point out, this article went up November 26th. Okay? Anna's video went up 5 days ago on December 1st. There was time for this video to, acknowledge that the quote was taken out of context. That particularly the quote that is on screen right now was taken out of context. So, and I haven't been watching TYT religiously lately, so I'm unsure. Maybe someone who has can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they've issued any correction on this. I don't think they've talked about how there's been additional clarification from the activists interviewed for this article that they were done dirty. Weird.
We have to make it okay for someone to change their minds. We cannot vilify them for not being on our side. No one wants to join that team. And he says no one wants to feel stupid or condescended to. Another advocate named Mara Kiesling, who founded the National Center for Transgender Equality back in 2002, remembered an adage that she used 20 years ago about the
Now, far be it from me to nitpick here, but this is also not the first time she's stumbled over pronouns for trans people on the air. She doesn't do that for non-trans people.
Fucking pronouns!
legislative priorities. You can't say don't fire them until you can say don't kill them, meaning that advocates should focus first on measures that reinforce the fundamental humanity of transgender people, such as hate crime protections. Then, she said, you can push more effectively for laws about discrimination. And she also argues that activists lost credibility with many Americans once they started accusing people of bigotry for having concerns about trans women in high level sports. We looked unreasonable. We should be talking about the 7-year-old who just wants to play soccer with her friends.
Now I'm gonna pause here because like I understand what Mara Kiesling is trying to say here, which is that, you know, it's the optically difficult to argue against like, oh well, like a 500-pound bodybuilder could just say he's a woman that compete against ladies. That's bad. Like that's hard to argue against when your opponents are conservative dipshits, right? The issue is you need to attack that underlying assumption because they're just going to move it to the hyperbolized version that they've imagined in their heads. Whether it's a 7-year-old playing school sports or like a 25-year-old bodybuilder. So you need to attack the fundamental premise of what they're arguing, which is that trans people should not be allowed to compete in the sports of their like that they identify with, right? You need to attack that. And you know, one might say, well, what about why aren't you focusing on the hate crime stuff? And it's like, well, you can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. You know, you can do more than that. Like there's some people who are expert on sport medicine. Like they are better suited for that conversation. But I will also just throw this out there, right? When we look back at past civil rights struggles, one of the things that we see are those civil rights struggles also playing out within the realm of sports. This isn't a new premise. Like trying to say, well, this is a distraction. What was fighting Jim Crow by fighting to desegregate sports? Was that a mistake? Was it genuinely? I'm kind of baffled by this argument, right? Like, the history of like integrating sports in more progressive ways would indicate that that is actually a component of the civil rights struggle, right? I mean, yeah, iconic. And it really does just seem to me that I I feel like some people just don't get it, right? That a lot of people are just like, oh well, it's just, you know, we're making a huge mistake by arguing this, and it's like, who's making the mistake? Because like, is it your organization that you help run? No. Oh, do you just mean people on Twitter are arguing that actually they think it'd be a good idea? Because that's just people acting as individuals. That's not the movement as a whole. However, maybe more organizations should throw their weight behind integrating sports. You know, just a thought. Just a thought. Now, moving right along.
And look, this is the critical takeaway from the piece. Advocates say that their research had found that the most effective messaging takes into account that most Americans do not know a lot about life as a transgender person and reinforce the basic idea that transgender people want what everyone else wants: fairness, respect, and love.
Which, by the way, all of those things are demonstrated and fostered when trans kids and people are allowed to compete alongside cisgender people in the, with the gender of their heart, you know? Like, you can't say that you can't say that you're reinforcing the idea that trans people are equal and want all the same things if you cede the ground of sports. Yeah, Crystal Hazer says, I'm someone suited for that conversation. Transphobes frustrated me to no end with their willful ignorance and resistance to understanding science when it's laid out for them. Yeah, I've looked into the science, by the way. I've been paying attention to the sports science around transgender athletes for years now. And guys, guess what? The only real discussion to be had here is not whether or not trans kids or trans adults should be able to play in sports that align with their gender identity. The only question is, you know, once puberty starts being at play here, do they need to be on HRT 1 year or 2 years? That's it. That's the only question. Because all of the science indicates that after 1 year or 2 years, depending, that's the one point of nebulousness here. When do trans people generally reach parity with cis people? When transitioning, right? And that's really the only real question. So why would you cede the ground when instead you could educate and advocate? Your job is to advocate. If you are an advocate, like definitionally, why cede the ground? Especially if your goal is to show that trans people want and desire all of the same things and to be treated the same as everyone else in society. Why would you cede that ground? A ground that is, by the way, considered by the vast majority of people a place of relative, equality. You know, and a sphere that everyone in the country pays attention to. People pay attention to sports. Trans people should be able to participate in that.
Now, obviously, not everyone agrees, but before we get to that, curious what you think, Waz.
Now, very interesting here. I'm just gonna look here because there's a lot going on here. Remember at the beginning when she talked about a Democratic congressman defended parents who expressed concern about transgender athletes competing against their young daughters. A local party official and ally compared him to a Nazi cooperator, and a group called Neighbors Against Hate organized a protest outside of his office. That's strange. Let's read a little bit more about that. Let's see. Oh, I can't actually read this. I haven't subscribed. That's too bad. Let's see. Protesters descend on Democratic congressman's office over transgender comments. That's weird. It doesn't sound like he's defending parents. It sounds like he made some comments. Let's read here. Yes, outside of Seth Moulton's Salem office, and appeared full of individuals hoisting various pride flags. Let's see here. Salem City Councilor-elect Kyle Davis issued an invite for the event to Salem residents last week, calling for attendees to show support for the LGBT community. Quote, "Join us in a celebration of the trans and queer community. Our aim for this event is to communicate loud and clear to that we love and stand in solidarity with the trans community on the North Shore. This is a time when we need local leaders to stand with us and reaffirm our commitment to the LGBT plus community." What are they protesting exactly outside of his office? The demonstration follows Representative Moulton issuing sharp criticism to the Democratic Party in the wake of the presidential election. Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend anyone rather than being brutally honest about the challenges many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. Representative Moulton said earlier this month that he stands firmly in his belief for the need for competitive women's sports to put limits on the participation of those with the unfair physical advantages that come with being born male. That's transphobia. That is not, defending concerned parents and being like, well, we have concerned parents in the community, and we need to respect all constituents. This isn't like some even-handed like, yes, I must protect my constituents' rights. He himself was transphobic on multiple occasions and directly advocated for transphobic policies that have also been advocated for by Republicans. So that's just paragraph number 2, chat. And guess what? I'm going to read you the opening paragraph, which is just one sentence, because this article and Jeremy W. Peters are dog shit. Opening sentence. To get on the wrong side of transgender activists is often to endure their unsparing criticism. Oh, I'm sorry. To be a transphobe is to be, I wanted to be a transphobe, but then people were mean to me. That's really how you're opening your New York Times article? This is the article that Anna Kasparian, host of one of the largest progressive news networks online, decided to highlight. Oh no. People on the internet are mean sometimes. The horror. Paragraph number 3. When J.K. Rowling said that denying any relationship between sex and biology was deeply misogynistic and regressive, a prominent LGBTQ group accused her of betraying real feminism. A few angry critics posted videos of themselves burning her books. Because we need to be nicer to J.K. Rowling. Look at how mean you're being to her. That poor billionaire who's used her fortune and social capital to ruin trans people's lives. Oh no, won't somebody think of the poor billionaire? Incredible. And then it goes on, okay? Then it goes on to quote Rodrigo out of context. And it's just so dog shit. Some LGBTQ activists have put pressure on liberal candidates for office to take positions that align with theirs, which can backfire. Republicans pummeled Vice President Kamala Harris in ads this year over the answers she gave in a 2019 questionnaire from the American Civil Liberties Union, one of the groups that has been active in the transgender cause. And it's just like, that didn't backfire because she answered a question in 2019, half a decade ago. It backfired because she had no gumption. She had no courage to actually hold a positive and affirmative position of her own. So her enemies were able to paint her with whatever ridiculous clown makeup they wanted, when she could have just gone out, set the narrative that, yeah, she's unequivocally in favor of transgender rights. She could have just come out, given like that as a statement, and then like said nothing else. She didn't even say the word transgender during this campaign. You can't say that this is her support of transgender issues backfiring when they had to dig up an answer to a questionnaire from her primary 5 years ago. Yeah. We're like a dozen paragraphs in now. Republicans spent tens of millions of dollars on ads that accused Democrats of wokeness and capitalized on the unfamiliarity most Americans have with transgender people's lives, using hyperbole and distortions that often created false impressions of schoolhouse indoctrination and locker rooms full of predators. So why are you burying the lead here, a dozen paragraphs in, that the real reason opinion has shifted is due to the ungodly amount of money being spent on this issue by rich bigots who want to distract? Again, the only way you can highlight this article, really, if you are Anna Kasparian, is if you agree with it. Because there are so many problems that are glaringly obvious to me from a cursory look through this article that the only way you can regurgitate it, largely without any kind of asterisk or clarification or any other aspect that might provide some amount of critique to it, is if you just unequivocally agree with the transphobic ideas it propagates. It is insane. And again, it just again, the ACLU questionnaire from 5 years ago. This is being used as your big gotcha of how this can backfire? Are you kidding? What we are facing is a fundamental unfairness, and that is not coming from people who are interested in compromise and open debate, said Jillian Brandstetter, a communication strategist with the ACLU who works on transgender advocacy. These are people who are threatened by trans people's very existence, and more importantly, they're trying to scapegoat us. Yeah. Because it threatens their idea of masculinity, and they can use it for the political utility of distracting from other material policies. I'm sorry, you read this article and you're like, yes, this is a good one to advocate. Here's another quote from Representative Seth Moulton, that guy who was just concerned about parents, remember? Who then turned out to actually just be very transphobic. I wonder what he has to say here. Here we are calling Republicans weird, and we're the party that makes people put pronouns in their email signature.
Fucking pronouns!
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's very simple, Joe. In terms of like Kamala Harris's messaging, it's very simple. She just has to actually have a spine. She has to have a spine and be like, when someone asks her about like transgender rights, just be like, I unequivocally support transgender rights. Full stop. Yeah, they deserve full civil rights. That you don't even have to be like waving a pride flag while you do it. You just say that you're in favor of trans rights. She didn't even do that. The bar was unimaginably low. And this is so interesting to me because keep in mind here, right? This is about to go into the discussion phase of the show, and we'll watch that. We'll watch that portion of the segment, right? But keep in mind that buried towards the end of this article is kind of a point that kills their argument. Transgender rights were not top of mind for most voters on election day. According to Gallup, voters who were asked how important each of 22 national issues were in their voting decisions ranked transgender rights the lowest, which was so baffling to me. I felt the need to actually go and look that up. And sure enough, the most cited as not important idea was transgender rights. Like, people either thought it was only somewhat important or not important at all. And the only people who thought it was very important or extremely important, only 38%. That was not an issue that was driving people to the polls. It was the last and least important issue out of 22 other ones. The idea that this issue is being, like, pushed through because of the failures of transgender activist messaging is absurd. Even by this article's own standards. Oh, well, people were mean to J.K. Rowling. That's why we have Donald Trump. It's honestly lunatic horseshit, which is a great name for a band. But let's see the discussion.
You know, it's really interesting cuz I think it's a test case for when a movement when it comes to LGBTQ just, over time just like accumulated a lot of wins and felt like a lot of progress. I think it got
Wait, why are they doing it then? The liberal establishment is highlighting transgender activism as an issue to scapegoat their failures with Kamala Harris, with this campaign. They are saving their asses. Full stop. That is the only reason. They are grasping at straws, and they see trans people. They look at trans people. They're like, they're a convenient punching bag for the right. Let's make them into a punching bag for the left. That's it.
got to the trans stuff and the messaging and the aims became a little bit more aggressive because there was like, all right, we kind of won all of these victories, right?
Citation needed? Like what is this argument? Like, oh, LGBTQ people were just winning too much, and then they got too aggressive with their asks, and that crossed a line. Motherfucker, Pride started as a riot. What do you mean? What do you mean the fight for trans civil rights got too aggressive? The fight for gay rights, which was started by trans people, by the way, literally involved bricks through windows and setting shit on fire. What are you talking about?
Right. And I think what we're seeing is a sort of retrenchment from that. I want to say, first of all, just like on this and many issues, like my principles are kind of the same. Like, I don't think you should be able to deny a trans person a job, a way to work because they're trans. You can't deny them housing because they're trans. You can't deny them health care because they're trans. Like this.
Okay, all of that's good so far. Maybe if you stop talking now, you'll be fine. Maybe.
This is just, these are the basic pillars of civil rights, right? However, on an issue like trans people in sports, when
that butt was really big.
basically 70% of the country are like, well, we already separate women and men's sports already. How am I a crazy person for thinking we should just keep it that way, even for trans people? Like the idea that those people are foaming at the mouth, bigots who want to string trans people up. I just don't think that's an effective message. I think this, I think it just needs to be demonstrated again, more education. And
they want to pass laws for children to have their genitals inspected. Like, what kind of argument is this? Like, I don't think it's crazy. What do you mean you don't think it's crazy? They want to have someone check the genitals of children playing sports. And in the cases of adults, guess what? There are adult leagues. And you want to know something else? The highest ranking sporting organizations in the world allow trans athletes to compete. The Olympics allow trans people to compete. Like, are you saying you know better than the Olympics? Additionally, like, I don't know how to say this, but like, again, I have to circle back around to the fact that like the civil rights, part of the struggle for civil rights is always incorporated sports and the normalization of people through sports by participating in communal competition. That is one of the avenues trans people can be normalized in society. And frankly, this is one of the reasons why conservatives obsess over keeping trans people out of sports. And I just... I don't know. Like, I feel like if you are someone who truly believes in like this equality notion, then you should do your research. And you should understand that the science that has been done on trans people in sports indicates that if they've been on HRT for 1 to 2 years, any kind of athletic advantage they may have had from like testosterone, if it's a trans girl, is gone. The most recent study on like trans athletes, by the way, on trans women athletes, by the way, indicated that like lung function tends to be lower in trans girls than in cis girls. Like the idea that trans women and cis men are equivalent has been an idea in sports science for a while now. And the new study that just came out, a new study just came out that showed that is not correct. That is not a correct comparison at all. So again, arguing that this should be like, oh, well, we already segregated, why don't we keep segregating it? That's not a good argument here, because we're talking about fundamentally different groups of people that need that should maybe be playing in the groups that they identify with. I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah, it's like HRT causes body changes or something. It's really wild, right? As a trans person to talk about these issues, because I sit here, right? And I'm like, I have these big bazongas, right? I have big old titties. You know, I have like double D tits, all right? And I'm over here being like, you're trying to say that like I am biologically the same as a cis man. And I just want to say, like, I don't think that's true. Like, I don't know. Let me pull something up here, right? Let me pull something up real quick. Where is this? Where did I put this? Let me take a look real quick. I thought I had it really handy, and I don't, and it makes me mad. Yeah, here we go. A lot of you have seen this before, right? A lot of you have seen this before. Okay? This is me from a few years ago. By a few years ago, I mean like 7 years ago, 6 years ago? 7 or 8 years ago. Okay? And like, I can tell you, biologically, I am very different from where I was back then. Let me see if I can find an additional one here. No, that's no good. Like, my face can't grow that hair anymore, right? My body doesn't make the same chemicals anymore. You know, like, I used to be furry all over, chat. Now I'm not. And that's not because I got any kind of like medical procedure. That's just a change that happens with HRT. Because you change biologically. You are different. I know there's another one on here somewhere. Whatever, I'll find it later, I'm sure. But essentially, the idea that, like, that guy who has, like, chest hair and is, 2 inches taller than me and, like, is much hardier than me in a lot of different ways, and I are, like, the same biologically, it's just not so. And, like, oh, yeah, these tits, these double D tits that I didn't have several years ago, I didn't get surgery to get those. My body just made them. Because my body changed biologically. So, like, I hope you guys get the point I'm trying to make here. That, like, his position is one also born out of ignorance here, in a way that I find deeply irritating and disturbing for someone who is on such a large platform.
And just a more willingness to like meet people where they are and not assume every single person you meet is going to have the views on trans issues as everybody from your freaking liberal arts college. Like it just doesn't work like that. And again,
Yeah, also the idea that the only people who could possibly be on board with trans issues are like hoity-toity, like pink-haired activists from your local liberal arts college, when in reality, like, the vast majority of trans people are working class Americans who work with other working class Americans who find people and groups of people within that environment to support them and love them. Like, again, the vast majority of people who are trans and who, again, really when they're saying trans activists, they just mean trans people. Because every single trans person becomes an activist when they need to, out of necessity.
I say this up here all the time. If you think that 70%, like you're on the other side of a 70+% issue, if your answer to that is like that 70% of the population are complete crazy scumbag idiots who I need to berate at every turn, you're just going about this all wrong.
Again, I'm sorry, I'm unaware of these trans activist groups that as a matter of policy are going out there and harassing just random strangers. No one's doing that. Now, are individual trans people being salty at other people online? Yeah. Welcome to the internet. Everyone is doing that all the time. But also, one of the ways you win over people who haven't made up their minds on trans issues or on any issue is to agitate, be irritating, and like get the message out there, right? Like there are issues in the past that were correct morally, ethically correct, but weren't supported by the majority of the population. Okay? There are so many examples of issues like that. And like, you should still advocate for the correct position, even if it means you have to be irritating. Even if it means you have to say something unpopular and stand up in your group of friends and say, hey, that's not right. It asks for courage for people to stand up and rise to the moment. So when he's like, what do you mean you berate people? Well, you know, sometimes an act of courage might include, you know, some hard truths. Sometimes standing up to a bigot might require you to say some hard truths. Sometimes advocating for a marginalized group's humanity and worthiness might require courage. I don't know. Do these people have the courage for that? I'm not convinced, and that's deeply sad, especially for people who represent one of the largest progressive online news networks.
I will never tire of saying that.
Yeah, and look, let's remember how the gay community won over the hearts and minds of Americans. It took a tremendous amount of patience. It took, like almost like a public education campaign so people could actually familiarize themselves with gay people in this country. But more importantly, they made an effort
Oh,
to like make clear, like, we're not a threat. We're just like everyone else.
I know I've mentioned this multiple times, but my partner went to gay prom in high school, and activists showed up there. Not, of course, trans activists who, as we all know, have bad tactics, I guess, according to this video. But evangelical Christian activists. And they showed up to her gay prom with buckets full of rocks so that they could stone the children attending gay prom. That was in my lifetime. Okay? It didn't just take like being seen as acceptable. It took courage, and it took the courage not just to put your body on the line, but also to like stand up and assert yourself, even though you knew it was going to be an unpopular thing to do. Even though you knew, it could result in you getting like beat up and lynched on the side of the road. That happened. Gay people would sometimes just disappear, and you didn't know whether or not they died from AIDS, or whether they had been disowned by their family, or what happened to them. You would just never see them again. And that was in my lifetime. I'm not that old. I may be old, but I'm not that old. And it was not about being acceptable. Because, frankly, being gay in America is still seen by the vast majority by a lot of Americans. I'm not going to say the vast majority, but like a lot of Americans see being gay as deviant, you know? And you can be a conventionally attractive man with another conventionally attractive man, and you want to know what happens? There are still like an ungodly number of people in this country who will tell you to your face that they don't think you should be able to have children. There are still enough people in this country that believe gay people don't deserve like marriage rights. And they're still advocating for it on a national party level. And so when we're talking about this, the palatability of gay people was not the thing that ultimately won gay people rights. It's just not. What won gay people rights was the literal blood, sweat, tears, and lives given for that cause. So, like, I don't know. I really, this is all just so disappointing.
So I think that the patience is a difficult thing to have. I am an impatient person. And when I feel that I've been wronged or in whatever way discriminated against, whether it's because I'm a woman or whatever reason, you do feel that urge, that instinct to get defensive, to lash out. But you have to kind of think about what the bigger picture is and how this is really a persuasion campaign. And when your first line is to attack the person who isn't fully on board immediately, well, then you've just lost someone who might have actually been receptive if you were willing to just pause for a minute, take a breath if you need to. But
Again, there are like in this hypothetical she's constructed, there are so many undefined elements. Like, well, hypothetically, what if a man just was walking down the street at some point and said idly to himself, I don't know much about these transgender people. Maybe trans boys should play with cis girls. And then, like, out of a bush jumps like a trans woman, and she's like, "What did you say, motherfucker?" And he's like, and then she's like, "Yeah, that's what I thought, bitch," and then walks away. And then he becomes even more transphobic than before. Like that's like the hypothetical she's drawing here. This just isn't the case. The people predominantly being criticized for their transphobic positions aren't like random passers-by. They're public figures who have real influence and power in society, or who they are politicians who are actively advocating for or against policy that directly impacts transgender people.
come back and try a different way of getting that individual to understand where you're coming from. And that takes a lot of work. It's very difficult. But I do think, look, here's the problem though. This is the problem I had with the piece. And I think this is a problem.
Are we gonna get some criticism of the actual meat of the piece that you seem to have glossed over so far?
Problem that the Democratic Party has overall with every social issue.
Uh-oh.
I don't think that the majority of transgender activists or transgender people behave like this. I don't think the majority of them are
Why did you bury that 10 minutes into this?
Aggressive or combative. I have a friend who's transgender. She is not like this at all. And in fact, she can't stand that, like, this is the way, people think of trans activists. It's a
I wonder if she's talking about Brianna Wu.
Small group of very loud people, and they get all the attention. And they really need to consider how the movement at large feels about the tactics they're deploying.
again, you keep saying transgender activists when I think you are just talking about trans people on Twitter. I think you are just talking about trans people on Twitter. And I think that's specifically because this has been a 10-minute long segment, and at no point have you named an actual activist or group or anything other than the nebulous idea of a hypothetical trans activist that you can imagine being mean. Yeah, is it trans people who criticize you? Like, what? Narrow the block is all I'm saying.
Because it's not just about making people who aren't on board feel comfortable. It's about winning. And if they're deploying tactics that lead to losing, well, then the movement overall is obviously going to be upset about that.
Again, but this isn't a question of tactics for like trans activists. We're talking about working class people who make less on average than, you know, normal Americans, right? And, you know, I hope you all caught the air quotes there, because that's the framing she's using here. But trans people in general tend to be overwhelmingly less wealthy than the average American, and you're asking people who have the least in society, who make up like 1% of the population, to compete on their own against $500 million being spent on anti-trans advertising. Like, I'm sorry, the tactic that you're complaining about is literally just trans people existing and sharing opinions on a social media site. That's really what it seems like. Because there's no coherent advocacy org that is saying, yeah, go harass strangers about issues. Go be really pedantic about that. Like, what? You haven't brought up the money being spent on this. You haven't brought up, like, even the article that you're referencing brings that up. So I have to assume it's a deliberate omission. Unless you just didn't read the article. Like, you read like the first half of the article and you didn't get to how deep the other points were buried in it. Guess that's possible. But the issue here is that this loss is because Republicans hyper-focused on this issue as a distraction from their piss-poor economic policies so that no one would Google what a tariff is. And it worked. Like, I'm sorry, but people being mean on Twitter aren't going to move the needle for the average voter that much. That's why we have to get out and go to the goddamn Democrat meetings. Go to your local political meetings, folks. They happen once a month. You can do it. And then once you're in the room, you can wield political power at the local and state level. Go do it. You are doing that, Lady Ringcloud, and I'm so proud of you. You know who else is doing it? Dragonfly is doing it. And I know a couple of you have committed to going to those meetings as well. So go to the goddamn meetings. 90% of building power in politics is just showing up to boring meetings. Okay? You can make that sacrifice.
And so I think more patience, more coordination, but also for those who have fallen prey to this ideology that everyone who's trans acts like this, or everyone who's a trans activist acts like this, it's just not true. It's a small group of very loud and aggressive people who I think might have their hearts in the right place, but aren't really thinking about how their tactics are counterproductive.
Okay, so again, you're just talking about individual posters on Twitter who are irritating. Like, that's bizarre. No, unironically, she's being nebulous because all she's talking about are trans people posting on Twitter or Blue Sky, I guess. Like, heaven forbid that the target of like genocidal hatred get upset at the people who wish them harm and are advocating for harm. Heaven forbid.
Yeah, I mean, last thing I'll say about this, I remember
Mhm.
Ta-Nehisi Coates was in a public spat with Andrew Sullivan about the bell curve, and he was just like, "Look, I'm not gonna." And the bell curve is like pseudo eugenic science about how black people are basically dumber than everybody. And he's like, "Look, I'm not gonna engage with somebody who thinks that black people are naturally dumber than people. That's not what this is. I'm sorry,
Right.
it's just not. Just the idea that the parents like, yeah, that 8-year-old trans kid is gonna kick my kid's ass at basketball. It's just a completely different argument. And I think, there's just gotta be some hand holding, man. Quite frankly, like you gotta
Yeah.
be willing to do some hand holding with these folks.
So just as an FYI, another component of eugenics pseudoscience that like what he was talking about there, it's not limited to just brains. A lot of eugenicists thought that certain groups of people were also bigger, faster, and stronger, and thus shouldn't be allowed to compete in sports with others along that line. Literally, it just brings us back to how sports were segregated in the past due to white supremacist ideas in eugenics. So, like, I that entire segment is baffling to a degree I really find disturbing. Like it's a failure across so many different levels of reporting responsibility and analysis and critical thought that I find it offensive that it's even considered in the same category of work that I do, and I make fart jokes while talking about the news. Like I'm a silly little guy. I just I make my little jokes. But I had better analysis, and I'm not like a genius by any means. I just learned how to do some critical analysis, and I guess chose to apply it in this circumstance. So crazy seeing all these multimillionaires on TV pontificating on the struggles of some of the most marginalized and least visible groups in this country. The betrayal I feel is ungodly, and I hate that I even feel it. I, I don't think Anna Kasparian's a millionaire, right? That sounds crazy to me. Also, their contributor, who was, he's definitely not a millionaire. Wait, she's a millionaire? Damn. All right. Oh, yeah, she probably has shares in the company. But anyway, like, one final thing that I'll add here, right? One final thing. I want to go back to that New York, actually, two final things. Second to last final thing. I want to go back to the guy who wrote that New York Times article that entire TYT segment was based on, right? I want to go back to that. Now, I want to look at this interview that Slate put together with Jeremy W. Peters, talking with him about his piece on Trump supporters. And basically, it was a piece where he talked with conservative voters, looked at polling data, and argued that Republicans are continuing to support the president in part because they're tired of constant attacks leveled at him by Democrats in the media. And basically that attacking Trump has made him stronger, and maybe Democrats need to stop doing that as much. Right? And so Slate interviewed him, and it's a fairly confrontational interview, but I wanted to look at this particular point because it really indicates the level of reporting at play here. And it's very infuriating. Here's a question from the Slate interviewer. The opening anecdote in your piece is about a woman named Gina Anders. You write, Gina Anders knows the feeling well by now. President Trump says or does something that triggers a spasm of outrage. She doesn't necessarily agree with how he handled the situation. She gets why people are upset. But Miss Anders, 46, a Republican from suburban Loudoun County, Virginia, with a law degree, a business career, and not a stitch of Make America Great Again gear in her wardrobe, is moved to defend him anyway. Unquote. You got some criticism online because Anders is listed as a senior consultant at a political action committee that pushes things like getting rid of Obamacare and protecting Confederate monuments. It seems like she would naturally be someone supportive of Trump rather than someone who was pushed into doing so by media criticism. Was it a mistake not to mention this? Meaning that he wrote an entire article here about her as if she is an average suburban mom. And she's not even an average, like, suburban conservative mom. She literally works for a political action committee dedicated to some of the most conservative causes. The only people with political action committees that are supporting Confederate statues are, like, pretty Nazi adjacent. Okay, let's be real here. They're pretty David Duke adjacent, let's say. So that's just the question, all right? That's just the question Slate poses. Here is Jeremy's response. Not at all, because Gina Anders is a business executive. This was something that a handful of liberal journalists and Democratic activists raised online to somehow discredit her as a voice who could speak to the phenomenon that I described in the story. That Trump supporters get their backs up and get very protective of him. But it is not just Trump supporters, it is people who kind of find themselves on the fence a lot of times with him because they can't always defend his behavior, and they don't always want to defend his behavior. So Gina's the perfect example of somebody who was not ever a Make America Great Again hat-wearing Trump person, but was just a conservative Republican, libertarian Republican I would describe her as, who's conflicted about her support for Trump, except that she's not. She literally runs a PAC that perfectly politically aligns with him. What do you mean? Oh, she didn't buy the merchandise? Whoop-de-fucking-do. A lot of people don't buy the merchandise. I voted for Kamala Harris. I didn't buy her shirt. It's incredible to me that she's like, that he's literally trying to argue that, like, oh, well, it's not important to mention that she's in charge of a goddamn super PAC. She's just a run-of-the-mill business executive. What an insane thing to say. Bereft of integrity. The interviewer follows up, right, but you end the piece with a quote from her, which is, quote, it all coalesces around Trump. It's either Trump wants to put people in cages in concentration camps, or on the other side, oh, the left just wants everybody to come into the country illegally so they can get voters. And then she says, we can't have a conversation. This makes her seem like someone more in the middle of the road who wants to bring everyone together. Exactly! But she's not! She's literally a partisan, as her job. Yeah, when she spoke to me, that's exactly the way she seemed. I found her to be very thoughtful and not at all blindly following Trump just because he's Trump. That is the caricature that this story tried to break down. There's an awful lot of nuance and shades to these people's beliefs. because Gina apparently has an affiliation with a PAC in West Virginia that does a bunch of small races, as far as I can tell. I don't see how that is at all discrediting. She's active in politics. How is that not at all relevant to the story? It's all of the story. This is something she appeared to do 6 years ago when she worked for Ron Paul's campaign. She's a political activist. She literally worked for Ron Paul. You didn't see fit to mention that? This is the journalist that you are propagating, Anna Kasparian? Oh my God. Sorry. I went to do my due diligence and asked people in Paul World if they had ever heard of her, and they said they hadn't. I'm sure you did your full due diligence there, Buster. On the PAC website, it says about her, having long been passionate about American politics, she became active in Dr. Ron Paul's presidential campaign in 2012 and completed the Foundation for Applied Conservative Leadership's basic and advanced level training in grassroots activism. Gina also served as co-coordinator for the Campaign for Liberty in West Virginia before founding the Liberty Political Action Committee of West Virginia. An avid liberty activist and constitutional scholar, Gina puts her skills and experience in advocacy and sales to work to fight for the individual rights of every West Virginian as enshrined in our Constitution. This is not due diligence if you left this out. If you're leaving this out, you did not do your due diligence. Right, I've read that. Here's the thing. She is not a political operative. I don't know, if you completed 2 training courses for grassroots politics and you worked on a presidential political campaign and you founded a political action committee, that sure sounds like you're a political operative. There's an effort by a handful of liberal journalists who write for liberal publications and Democratic activists and strategists to portray her as some kind of bigwig political operative. No one's saying she's a bigwig political operative. They're saying she's a political operative. Doesn't matter that she's not a big one. She does this full time. I'm so mad. And that I was somehow dishonest or misleading by not identifying her as such. She is not a political operative. I'm sure if you say that more, it makes you more credible. She is an accounting executive who had apparently done some politics in the past in her spare time. And I just want to say, if you've done your due diligence and you knew that she was a political operative, you don't need to like saying she's a business executive who apparently was an operative at one point. No. No. You knew that. You withheld it. Yeah, moving the goalpost quite far. There's also this false information on Twitter about what her political role actually is, saying she was the chairman of this PAC. She isn't the chairman of that PAC. She isn't even on the board. She's a senior advisor or a consultant or something. And when I talked to her, she never brought this up. She never said, oh, by the way, I ran this PAC for Ron Paul. You would think that if it was something that was a big part of her life, she would have mentioned it. She didn't. Yeah, maybe I can't imagine why a political operative would want to dupe you. And clearly did. Because you're trying so hard to make it seem like I'm just bizarre stuff. Localist Party, you don't have issues chatting. I see you. And you know, to the Slate interviewer's credit, they follow up on this too. Or she didn't want to mention it because it doesn't fit with the narrative she's putting forward. No, I don't think that's the case at all. She doesn't think like a journalist. She wouldn't have any reason to hide that from me. Are you? Were you born yesterday? No, I'm sorry. That's insensitive. Were you born like an hour ago? Are you still in the amniotic sac? Are you kidding me right now? Yeah, what motive would a political operative who runs a PAC that is very supportive of Donald Trump, what motive would they have to lie to spin a narrative that makes them seem like the most reasonable person in the room? What a baby-brained moron. And this is the writer of the article that, Anna Kasparian decided to regurgitate to an audience of 80,000 people. 80,000 people had watched that video, by the way. If I read her bio on this website, I would think she's a very serious Republican, and I would think she's going to be very unlikely to give up on a Republican president. I don't think so. I think that's wrong, and it's a major misconception pushed out there by people who are unfairly and misleadingly attacking the story. Again, a handful of Democratic activists and liberal journalists. This is what I don't understand, and this is really frustrating. And I want you to make sure this is clear in your piece. I don't understand why people do not see that as somebody who is a Ron Paul person, a committed libertarian, someone who talks about the importance of the Constitution and all that, why Donald Trump wouldn't be troubling her. There's this tendency on the left to lump all Trump supporters into one category. They're all crackpots. Oh, Ron Paul had a bunch of yahoos supporting him, so they naturally went over and became yahoos who are supporting Trump. And it's a lazy and reductive way of looking at what the Trump coalition is. Except that's exactly what this is. She founded a political action committee that is supportive of Trump policies. She aligns politically with Donald Trump. I'm sorry, on no basis whatsoever, this guy's going out there and saying, well, you don't know what's in her heart. Who would talk about the Constitution all the time and secretly and support someone who's against the Constitution? The Federalist Society, literally every single conservative advocacy org filters their activism through the Constitution in order to try and validate what they're doing. It's like literally all of them. I'm not a conservative Republican. I just vote for, advocate for, and lobby for every conservative Republican policy. Exactly. Sounds like a fascist to me. Yeah. I mean, I would agree with you. The Republican Party is fascist. To the question about why a libertarian wouldn't have trouble with Trump, that's like asking why the loudest patriots and people who talk the most about the greatness of America are celebrating the Confederate States, which waged war on America. We know how these things operate in practice. The Koch brothers are libertarians who got behind Trump. You and I both know how people's political views work. How could the Tea Party get behind Trump? But you're proving my point, because they are conflicted in their opinions about him. No, they're not. There's not a single Tea Partier who is like, I don't know, I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. No, you were born 5 minutes ago, okay? You are, no, sorry. You were born 10 days in the future, all right? You aren't even conceived of yet. The naivete is off the charts. I would even say weaponized. Because I think this guy is an incredibly bad faith actor within the New York Times and such. Now, I just want to point this out here. Let me see if I can pull this up here. Oh, yeah. Also, one last thing. This Jeremy Peters guy, you may have heard of him from one other story. And that is very specifically the story of the 200 New York Times contributors who signed an open letter to the New York Times owners to condemn them for platforming transphobia. Now you might be saying, oh, is Jeremy one of the people who signed this letter? Well, no. No, he's not. He's the guy who wrote the letter condemning the initial letter. So let's read that real quick, huh? Dear Susan, we are writing to you privately in response to your February 17th letter, which we were surprised to see. Like you, we support the right to a non-hostile workspace where everyone is respected and supported. We believe the New York Times should never engage in biased or discriminatory practices of any kind. We all strive to be part of a truly diverse news organization where everyone is treated fairly. We welcome robust and respectful critical feedback from colleagues, either in direct conversation or through internal Times channels. But your letter appears to suggest a fundamental misunderstanding of our responsibilities as journalists. Regretfully, our own union leadership now seems determined to undermine the ethical and professional protections that we depend on to guard the independence and integrity of our journalism. Factual, accurate journalism that is written, edited, and published in accordance with time standards does not create a hostile workplace. Every day, partisan actors seek to influence, attack, or discredit our work. We accept that. But what we don't accept is what the Guild appears to be endorsing, a workplace in which any opinion or disagreement about Times coverage can be recast as a matter of workplace conditions. Our duty is to be independent. We pursue the facts wherever they may lead. We are journalists, not activists. That line should be clear. Debate over fairness and accuracy are perfectly reasonable. We understand and respect that the Guild has an absolute duty to offer representation to members when they are subject to discipline by management. But we do not think it is the role of our union to be engaged in and taking sides in public debates over internal editorial decisions. Our hope is that the coming days will bring more constructive internal dialogue among Times employees and Guild membership that can help unify and improve our news organization. And we ask that our union work to advance, not erode, our journalistic independence. And just to be clear here, the letter that he is writing is also in part a response to GLAAD's letter. And you might be asking yourselves, what is GLAAD's letter? Well, you see the New York Times employees here that wrote up their letter to the owners, which by the way you can read in full here. It's quite lengthy. We're not going to go over it at the moment, but here are all of the people who signed it. By the way, a lot of people agree with these hostile working conditions. You know, it's a lot. Oh, and also, not just all of those people, but the 20,000 media workers, subscribers, and readers of the New York Times. And, yeah, you know, stuff like, Here, I'm just going to pick this. For example, Emily Bazelon's article, The Battle Over Gender Therapy, uncritically used the term patient zero to refer to a trans child seeking gender-affirming care, a phrase that vilifies transness as a disease to be feared. Bazelon quoted multiple expert sources who have since expressed regret over their work's misrepresentation. Another source, Grace Lindixie Smith, was identified as an individual person speaking about a personal choice to detransition, rather than the president of GCCAN, an activist organization that pushes junk science and partners with explicitly anti-trans hate groups. In a similar case, Katie Baker's recent feature, When Students Change Gender Identity and Parents Don't Know, misframed the battle over children's right to safely transition. The piece fails to make clear that court cases brought by parents who want schools to out their trans children are part of a legal strategy pushed by anti-trans hate groups. These groups have identified trans people as an existential threat to society and seek to replace the American public education system with Christian homeschooling. Key context Baker did not provide to Times readers. And these are just, the letters are a lot. There's a lot in here, okay? But long story short here, they are valid concerns about glaring editorial failures, whether deliberate or accidental, to a point where 200 employees and 20,000 readers felt the need to sign on to a petition / open letter condemning those mistakes and failures. And has the New York Times changed course? No. Has Jeremy Peters acknowledged any point in this letter? No. He simply wagged a finger with his version of an open letter in order to condemn people asking for better editorial decision-making and factual articles published in their newspaper, and to say, oh, how dare you try and subvert our editorial independence. Well, maybe editorial independence should be subverted in the name of truth. Like, if there are factual errors in the reporting, maybe that should be corrected. That's not a controversial position. Yeah. And, maybe TYT should take a hint from that New York Times piece and incorporate some better editorial decision-making here, okay? If for no other reason, if they probably won't listen to me. They probably won't listen to you guys. But, maybe it should cause them to do a bit of a double take in the mirror to look at their comment section. Here are the comments. Everyone has had a gut full of these misogynist transvestites. They can go to hell where they belong and stay out of women's sports and bathrooms. I don't know what these words are. Golems, the lot of them. And they have put the gay movement back 40 years with their bizarre BS. No, Anna, it's not disgusting that Nancy Mace, a survivor of rape and sexual abuse, objects to men in the toilets in Congress. What is disgusting is that a proportion of Americans voted an AGP, which is a fake condition made to malign trans people, into a position of power where he can force the whole of Congress to unwillingly participate in his fetish by affirming him as a woman. I actually thought you were wising up, Anna, but you still haven't got a clue. Unsubscribing, yet again. IMO, the problem with the transgender community is that it expects fealty with all of their edifices, and any variation or deviation is considered transphobic. Now, of course, there are some people posting criticism of Anna's transphobia, and congrats on fighting the good fight in the comment section, I suppose. TYT going down the tube, leading to the right. True. The trans things are going to die out. The drugs are going to end. The acceptance is going to end, and the contagion will die. These are lunatic parents that are mostly white and mostly crazy left nut jobs. You know, another one condemning them for their move to the right. Trans activists are funded by Big Pharma. Are we? Because if so, I would love some of that money. You know, I am a streamer. I would like the monies. But I would still criticize you guys. You guys aren't going to give me money. Pharmaceutical companies have found record profits in a drug that costs $1 to produce, now brings in millions. Etc., etc. Stuff, waffle about castrating chemicals that castrate sex offenders. Whatever. Which, by the way, in case anyone's curious about that particular talking point, some puberty blockers or like testosterone blockers have similar effects to that, but the dosage given to chemically castrate is exponentially higher than what trans people take. Men should not be allowed in women's bathrooms, etc., etc. It is deeply upsetting. But I am heartened to see some of these comments pushing back. I'm gay, and this movement has nothing to do with gay rights. Yeah. All right. Enough of that nonsense. Nasty nonsense. Anyway, I can't imagine being happy with that kind of audience and community. You know, inviting all these people who hate you if you have some semblance of a woke position. I don't know. Seems like a miserable experience. But I guess if it's coming from a genuine place of change, then, you know, you're just living your truth, and your truth happens to be bigoted. And maybe that's not an effective strategy for me to pursue here by pointing that out. But I think pointing it out, calling it out, and providing education on the issue and showing exactly how full of shit that segment was, hopefully that did some good and helped people out there on the internet make better and more informed choices about where they get their news. So, on that note, we finally finished the segment, folks. We did it.